The federal courtroom was a furnace of tension, its high ceilings amplifying the sharp silence. Jasmine Crockett sat at the witness stand, her eyes fierce, her hands steady, summoned to testify in a politically charged inquiry on judicial oversight. Across from her, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett presided, her face cold, her gavel a quiet threat. The room was packed, reporters, lawmakers, aides, all sensing a trap. Barrett's voice was calm but sharp, her words aimed at Crockett. "Congresswoman, you're here to answer, not to lecture," she said, her eyes hard. "Stick to the questions." Crockett leaned forward, her voice clear and bold, her posture unyielding. "I'm here to tell the truth," she said, her eyes locked on Barrett. "This hearing's a setup, and I'm not playing your game." The crowd gasped, her defiance a spark in the dry air. She'd been called to testify on her public criticisms of the judiciary, but she saw the real goal: to silence her, to paint her as a troublemaker. Barrett's lips tightened, her control tested, Crockett's fire already burning through her script. Barrett raised a hand, her voice colder, her words like ice. "You'll respect this court, or you'll face consequences," she said, her gavel tapping lightly. A warning. The crowd murmured, reporters scribbling, the tension rising. Crockett's smile was grim, her voice fierce. "Consequences?" she said, her eyes blazing. "I'm not scared of you, Justice. You're hiding behind that robe, but I see your game." The room erupted, some cheering, others hissing, her words a blade cutting through Barrett's authority. Outside, the courtroom, Crockett's team watched on a live feed, their faces tense. Her defiance was spreading fast, clips of her clash with Barrett already online. The hearing was meant to crush her, to weaken her voice, but she was fighting back harder than expected. Her aide whispered, "She's pushing too far. Barrett's got power." Crockett's chief of staff nodded, her voice low, fierce. "She's got truth," she said, "and she's not stopping." They prepared for fallout, knowing Barrett wouldn't let this slide. Crockett stayed at the stand, her heart pounding, her resolve like steel. Reporters leaned forward, cameras rolling, catching every word. Her team had evidence, Barrett's past rulings, favoring power over fairness, contradicting her neutral stance. Crockett planned to use it, to expose the justice's bias, in front of the world. "You want answers?" she said, her voice sharp, her eyes on Barrett. "Ask yourself why you're so scared of my voice." The crowd roared, the tension a living force, Barrett's face a mask of barely contained rage. The courtroom's heavy doors stayed shut, but the clash was already breaking free, news screens flashing Crockett's words. Barrett's threat. Barrett gripped her gavel, her voice low, venomous, as she stared at Crockett. "You're on thin ice," she said, her eyes cold. "Keep talking, and you'll regret it." The warning was a guillotine, but Crockett didn't flinch, her eyes fierce, her fight just beginning. The stage was set for a brutal war, and Crockett's next move would shake the nation, leaving Barrett to face the fire she'd ignited. Crockett's voice still echoed in the packed courtroom, her bold defiance. "I'm not scared of you, Justice," hanging heavy in the air. She sat at the witness stand, her eyes fierce, her hands clutching a folder of evidence exposing Barrett's biased rulings. The crowd buzzed, reporters scribbling, cameras catching every glare. Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward from the bench, her face a mask of icy control, her gavel a silent threat. Her voice cut through the tension, sharp and cold. "Congresswoman, you're here to testify, not to accuse," she said, her eyes hard. "One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt." Outside, news trucks lined the street, screens flashing Crockett's clash with Barrett, her words spreading like fire. Her team huddled in a nearby office, watching the live feed, their faces tense. An aide clutched a phone, tracking reactions. Voters were rallying behind Crockett, calling Barrett a bully. "She's winning hearts," the aide said, her voice low. "But Barrett's got the gavel." Crockett's chief of staff nodded, her eyes fierce. "Jasmine's got the truth," she said. "She'll burn this down if she has to." Crockett stared at Barrett, her smile grim, her voice steady. "And clear. Contempt?" she said, her eyes blazing. "You're the one hiding, Justice, using your power to silence me. I'm here for the people, and you can't stop that." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others gasping, her words a spark in a powder keg. She opened her folder, pulling a document. A Barrett ruling favoring corporate interests over workers. "This is your justice?" she said, her voice sharp. "No wonder you're scared of my voice." The room shook, Barrett's face tightening. With rage, Barrett's gavel slammed down, the sound a crack of thunder, her voice a hiss. "You're out of order, Congresswoman," she snapped, her eyes cold. "I warned you. Keep this up, and you'll see a cell." The crowd gasped, the threat of jail time ablaze at Crockett's throat. Reporters leaned forward, their pens flying, the tension suffocating. Barrett's team, seated behind her, exchanged nervous glances, knowing Crockett's defiance was unraveling their plan to crush her. But Barrett wasn't backing down. She'd break Crockett or be broken. In the courtroom's shadows, Crockett's aides slipped her a note. Barrett's allies were spinning the hearing, calling Crockett unhinged. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was iron. She leaned forward, her voice fierce, her words a flamethrower. "A cell," she said, her eyes locked on Barrett. "You can't cage truth, Justice. Your rulings betray the people, and I'm here to call it out." She held up another document, a Barrett decision dodging accountability, and the crowd roared, her evidence a gut punch, Barrett's control slipping. The courtroom doors stayed sealed, but the clash was a wildfire, news feeds screaming with Crockett's stand, Barrett's threat. Barrett gripped her gavel, her face pale, her voice low, venomous. "You're playing a dangerous game, Congresswoman," she said, her eyes burning. "Push me, and you'll regret it." The warning was a death knell, but Crockett's eyes didn't waver, her voice steady, her fight a furnace. She'd exposed Barrett's cracks, and the nation was watching, waiting for her next move to shatter the justice's armor. The courtroom crackled with raw fury, Jasmine Crockett's defiant words, "You can't cage truth," still ringing as she faced Coney Barrett. Her folder of evidence, exposing Barrett's biased rulings, lay open on the witness stand, each page a weapon. The crowd's roars shook the room, split between Crockett's fierce supporters and Barrett's silent allies. Barrett's face was stone, her eyes cold, her gavel raised like a blade. "Congresswoman, you're in contempt," she said, her voice sharp, her words a guillotine. "One more word, and I'll order jail time." The threat hung heavy, the air suffocating. Crockett's heart pounded, but her eyes blazed, her voice clear and fierce. "Jail me?" she said, her hands steady. "You're scared, Justice, because I'm showing the world your lies." She pulled a new document, a Barrett ruling favoring wealth over justice, and held it high. "This is what you protect," she said, her words cutting deep. "You don't serve the people, you serve power." The crowd erupted, some chanting her name, others hissing, her evidence a fire burning through Barrett's control. The cameras rolled, catching every word, every glare. Barrett's gavel slammed again, her voice a snarl, her face pale with rage. "Enough!" she shouted, her eyes locked on Crockett. "You're defying this court, Congresswoman. I'm ordering you detained." The crowd gasped, reporters scrambling, the room a furnace of chaos. Bailiffs stepped forward, their faces grim, ready to seize Crockett. Barrett's team nodded, their plan to crush her seeming to work, but Crockett's defiance was a storm they hadn't braced for, her fire threatening to consume them all. Outside, news vans broadcast the chaos live, Crockett's stand dominating every screen. Her team watched from their office, their phones buzzing with alerts. Voters were rallying, calling Barrett a tyrant, An aide clutched a tablet, showing clips of Crockett's evidence spreading online. "She's breaking through," the aide said, her voice tense. "But jail time's real." Crockett's chief of staff clenched her fists, her eyes fierce. "Jasmine's ready," she said. "She'll turn this into Barrett's nightmare." They prepared a public statement, fueling the fire Crockett had ignited. Crockett stood, her posture unyielding, her voice booming as the bailiffs closed in. "You think jail stops me?" she said, her eyes boring into Barrett. "I'm here for truth, and you can't silence that." She waved her folder, her words a flamethrower. "Your rulings betray us, Justice, and I'll keep shouting it, cell or no cell." The crowd roared, some weeping, others cheering, her defiance a beacon. The bailiffs hesitated, caught in her fire, while Barrett's face twitched, her authority cracking under Crockett's relentless assault. The courtroom's walls seemed to close in, the clash a wildfire raging beyond its doors. Barrett leaned forward, her voice low, venomous, her eyes burning. "You've gone too far, Congresswoman," she said, her gavel trembling. "You'll pay for this." But Crockett's smile was ice, her voice steady, her fight a furnace that wouldn't die. She'd turned Barrett's threat into a weapon, her evidence a blade, and the nation watched, waiting for her next move to shatter the justice's world. The courtroom was a furnace of chaos, Jasmine Crockett's defiant stand, "I'll keep shouting it, cell or no cell," igniting the air as bailiffs loomed closer. Her eyes blazed, her folder of evidence against Coney Barrett's rulings, clutched like a shield, each page a dagger aimed at the justice's heart. The crowd's roars were deafening, a mix of Crockett's supporters chanting her name and Barrett's allies shouting for order. Barrett sat high on the bench, her face pale, her voice a hiss of barely contained rage. "You're under arrest, Congresswoman," she said, her gavel slamming, her eyes cold. "Take her away." Crockett stood taller, her voice clear and brutal, her words cutting through the chaos. "Arrest me," she said, her eyes locked on Barrett. "You're the one in chains, Justice, tied to your lies." She held up a final document, a Barrett ruling shielding corruption, and waved it at the crowd. "This is her justice," she shouted, her voice a flamethrower. "She jails me to hide her shame." The crowd erupted, some rushing the barriers, others weeping, her evidence a bomb detonating Barrett's control. The bailiffs froze, her fire halting their steps. Barrett's hands shook, her voice a snarl, her eyes burning with fury. "Silence! Her!" she ordered, her gavel pounding, her authority crumbling. The crowd gasped, reporters scrambling, their cameras catching Crockett's unyielding glare. Barrett's team whispered frantically, their plan to crush Crockett unraveling as her defiance turned the hearing into a public execution of the justice's credibility. Barrett leaned forward, her voice low, venomous. "You'll rot in a cell, Congresswoman," she said, her eyes hard. But Crockett's resolve was iron, her fight a storm. Newsrooms across the nation exploded with the courtroom clash, screens flashing Crockett's stand, her arrest order trending. Her team gathered in a D.C. office, their faces tense, watching. Live feeds. An aide held a phone, reading messages. Voters were flooding the streets, protesting Barrett's threat. "She's a hero," the aide said, her voice fierce. "But the cell's real." Crockett's chief of staff nodded, her eyes cold. "Jasmine's turning this against Barrett," she said. "She'll make her regret it." They drafted a call to action, fueling the public's rage. Crockett faced the bailiffs, her heart pounding, her voice booming, unshaken by their approach. "You can't stop me," she said, her eyes boring into Barrett. "Jail me, and I'll shout louder, expose every lie you've built." She tossed her folder to the crowd, papers scattering, her evidence a beacon for their fight. The crowd surged, some grabbing the documents, others chanting her name, her defiance a wildfire. The bailiffs hesitated, caught in the chaos, while Barrett's face contorted, her power slipping through her fingers. The courtroom's heavy doors rattled as protesters gathered outside, their shouts echoing Crockett's words. Barrett gripped, her gavel, her voice a desperate hiss, her eyes wild. "You've destroyed yourself, Congresswoman," she said, her words a last stab. But Crockett's smile was cold, her voice steady, her fight a furnace that burned brighter. "You're the one destroyed, Justice," she said, her eyes fierce. "I'm just getting started." The nation watched, the tension a killing field, waiting for Crockett's next move to shatter Barrett's world. The courtroom was a battlefield, Jasmine Crockett's defiant roar. "I'm just getting started," a final spark in the powder keg she'd ignited. The crowd's screams shook the walls, a chaotic mix of her supporters chanting her name, and Barrett's allies demanding silence. Crockett stood at the witness stand, her eyes blazing, her scattered evidence, Barrett's corrupt rulings, clutched by the crowd, each page a blade against the justice. Coney Barrett gripped her gavel, her face a ruin, her voice a ragged hiss. "You're done, Congresswoman," she spat, her eyes cold. "Take her to a cell now." The bailiffs surged forward, their hands reaching for Crockett. Crockett's voice boomed, clear and brutal, her words a flamethrower as the bailiffs grabbed her arms. "You think a cell stops me?" she shouted, her eyes locked on Barrett. "You're the prisoner, Justice, trapped by your lies." She twisted, pointing at the crowd, her voice fierce. "They've got your truth now, your rulings, your shame." The crowd roared, some waving her documents, others rushing the barriers, her defiance a wildfire burning through Barrett's control. The bailiffs struggled, her fire overwhelming their grip. Barrett's gavel pounded, her voice a desperate snarl, her eyes wild with fury. "Order!" she screamed, her face pale. "You've ruined yourself, Crockett!" But the crowd drowned her, their cheers a requiem for her authority. Reporters scrambled, cameras catching Crockett's unyielding glare, her evidence a public execution of Barrett's legacy. Barrett's team stood frozen, their plan to silence Crockett shattered, her defiance turning the justice into a villain. Barrett leaned forward, her voice venomous. "You'll pay forever," she hissed, her words a dying gasp. Outside, the streets of D.C. erupted, protesters flooding the courthouse steps, their signs branding Barrett a tyrant. News screens blazed with Crockett's stand, her arrest a rallying cry. Her team watched from their office, their phones buzzing with alerts. Voters were marching, lawmakers demanding Barrett's accountability. An aide clutched a tablet showing clips of Crockett's words spreading worldwide. "She's unstoppable," the aide said, her voice fierce. "Barrett's finished." Crockett's chief of staff nodded, her eyes cold. "Jasmine's buried." "Her," she said, fueling the public's rage. Crockett fought the bailiffs, her voice unbroken, her eyes boring into Barrett as they dragged her toward the exit. "You're nothing, Justice," she shouted, her words a guillotine. "I've exposed you, and I'll keep exposing you, cell or no cell." The crowd surged, some breaking past security, their hands grabbing at her papers, her evidence a beacon for their fight. The bailiffs faltered, her fire a force they couldn't contain, while Barrett's face collapsed, her power reduced to ash by Crockett's relentless assault. The courthouse doors slammed shut, but the war raged on. Protesters, chants echoing Crockett's defiance, newsfeeds screaming her name. Barrett sat alone on the bench, her gavel still, her eyes hollow, Crockett's voice a relentless echo. "You're nothing." Her threat of jail had backfired, her legacy a ruin, her name a curse. Crockett, dragged to a cell, smiled grimly, her voice low, fierce, her fight eternal. "You regretted this, Justice," she whispered, her eyes cold. The nation roared, her fire unquenched, leaving Barrett broken in the ashes of her own failed trap.